Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Social Psychology. We're now on Chapter 4, which is Behavior and Attitudes. All right, we're going to start with a little survey, and it's only 4 items. All you need to do is select whether you strongly disagree, which is 1, or up through 2, 3, 4, or 5, strongly agree. To number 1, world hunger is a serious problem that needs attention. 2, our country needs to address the growing number of homeless people. 3, the right to vote is one of the most valuable rights of American citizens. 4, our government should spend less money on the military and more on helping citizens better their lives. So go ahead and give your attitudes on each of those 4. If you need to pause me, go ahead and do that, and then we will resume. All right, so presumably you've given your attitude. Let's talk a little bit about how attitudes lead to behaviors. First off, let's define what an attitude is. An attitude is a feeling. It's often influenced by our beliefs. And these feelings predispose us to respond favorably or unfavorably to objects, to people, to events. I can't think of anything else to list there, but so attitudes help us to know how to respond to things in our environments. Okay. In order for your attitudes to guide your behavior, first off, you must know what your attitude is. So let's do another little exercise. If we were in a face-to-face class, I'd have you raise your hand once you've settled on a rating. But what I would like you to be doing instead, since I can't see you, is just go ahead and note how long it takes you to decide what your rating is. And you can be vague. It could be quick or slow. It could be fast, medium, and slow. It could be however you want to, record how long it takes you to decide what your rating is. Now you'll notice that 0 is neutral, and then you can give a rating, a negative rating, down to -3, or a positive rating up to 3. They aren't labeled with any kind of words. It just, you're either leaning positively, you're leaning negatively, or you are neutral on the item. So let's begin. Our first thing that you're going to be rating is a vacuum. So decide where you would place the vacuum on that rating scale, and then kind of take it, be aware of how long it took you to decide what that rating was. Okay, so vacuum's just a good example. So now let's get into it for real, and I'm not going to bother you with my narration. You now know what to do. So our next thing is fun. Our next thing is vomit. Our next thing is toothbrush. War. Chocolate. Underage drinking. Okay. So in order for your attitudes to guide your behavior, you must know what your attitude is. So I use that little demonstration to illustrate that you probably had stronger attitudes about some of those topics than others. One way that you could tell that you had a stronger attitude is the rating that you gave, right? If you gave it a -3, you probably have a stronger attitude about that than something that you gave a -1. You also could tell how strong your attitude is about the subject by how long it took you to decide what your rating was. It may have taken you longer to decide what the rating was. When it was something closer to neutral, you're like, well, is it purely neutral, or is it slightly positive, slightly negative? I have to kind of think about it and put some effort into it. As opposed to things that you have strong attitudes about, you probably very quickly were able to apply a rating. Like vomit probably didn't take you much time to rate. So you have to know what your attitude is in order for it to be able to guide your behavior. So if you're encountering one of those topics that you're not exactly sure what you think about it, it's going to take you a while to decide what you think about it, which means you may have acted before you have fully formed your attitude, before you fully have activated your attitude about that topic. So a lot of the times we're confronted out in the world with circumstances that we've never considered before, that we've never really thought about what our attitude is. I mean, do I approve of this or do I not approve of this? Is it something that I value or something that I don't value? Is this part of my self-concept? to engage in this kind of behavior, or is it not? Right? Like if we've never thought about it, it's probably not going to affect our behavior. Now, if you do know what your attitude is, the attitude needs to be relevant to the behavior. It needs to matter for that behavior. So if you have a behavior, if you have an attitude, let's say, where you are a vegan and you're deciding whether to eat at a particular restaurant or not, it probably really does matter to you. It probably is relevant to the behavior, whether that restaurant serves animal products. If, on the other hand, you're an omnivore and you're not concerned about that, it's, that part isn't going to be really relevant to your behavior. In fact, it might be on the flip side. Like you want it to be a restaurant that serves animal products because you're looking for, eggs or chicken or a hamburger or whatever you're looking for. So not only do you need to know what your attitude is, but it needs to be relevant to the behavior, or else it's not going to influence your behavior. The attitude needs to be salient in the current context. You're going to notice across this quarter that we say the word salient a lot in social psychology, because salient, refers to whether it's noticeable, whether it has power in that situation. So again, if you're a person with dietary restrictions, that's going to probably be salient when you're picking a restaurant, right? Other times, in other circumstances, your dietary restrictions are not salient in that context. Like if you're deciding whether to sit in the front row or the middle of a classroom, it probably doesn't matter what your attitude is on eating animal products, right? Like that's not going to affect the behavior. It's not salient in the current context. I mean, you know what your attitude is on eating animal products. I think we could also argue that your attitude on eating animal products isn't really relevant to the behavior of where you sit in a classroom. So we're probably missing out on two here. But the idea I'm trying to drive home is that there are a lot of constraints on whether your attitude will actually shape your behavior. So now look at this. You've got a yes or no option for each question. Number one, do you personally do anything to lessen world hunger? For example, do you donate money or food or write to your representative? Two, do you personally do anything to help the homeless? For example, volunteer at a homeless shelter or donate money. 3, did you vote in the last election for which you were eligible? 4, do you personally convey your feelings to the government, for example, by writing your representatives or by participating in protests or marches? So a lot of times people will have attitudes on the first survey that I showed you that imply that they value one or more of these topics. And then when we get to this part, they maybe don't behave in ways that are consistent with that attitude. So even though they value something, they may not take the next step and actually engage in a behavior that shows that they value that thing. So basically what I want you to walk away thinking about is that attitudes rarely lead to behavior. We like to think that we're behaving in ways that are consistent with our attitudes, but a lot of times we're not. In studies on attitudes, people's expressed attitudes hardly predicted their varying behaviors. So for example, student attitudes towards cheating bore little relation to the likelihood of their cheating. Attitudes towards the church were only modestly linked with weekly worship attendance. Self-described racial attitudes provided little clue to behaviors in actual situations. So people behave in ways that may not really represent how they feel. Even if they are aware of that feeling, it still may not guide their behavior. Interestingly, behavior oftentimes leads to attitude change. Here's a graph that I pulled off of the internet that shows racial attitudes began to soften after the 1954 Supreme Court decision that desegregated schools. So here we are, basically 20 years later, the questioning starts. And you see every racist attitude declined over the course of, from 1972 to 2008. Basically, the idea is that engaging in activities with people who are of another race soften your attitudes, make you realize that everybody's people, and that, maybe the racist attitudes that you held or your parents held may not be correct, right? Like the actual engaging in behavior show you that, stereotyping people is never a good idea, right? That people vary. And so we see, like, the good news is from 1972, already hardly anybody was agreeing with the idea that blacks should go to separate schools. Like, hardly anybody was agreeing with that in 1972. There's always, I have to say, there's always a small minority of people who believe all sorts of stuff. So to get at that last, like 4% is really hard. But we see another bar that refers to favoring laws against intermarriage, it was called at the time. Virtually no one agrees with that anymore. The right to segregate your neighborhood significantly declined. That might be going back up, but not because of white racists, but on the other hand, it could be, ethnic groups wanting to be separate. And so that might be going back up now, but you see they stopped collecting that data in 2002. Home sellers can discriminate in sales. That's been going down significantly over time. So by engaging in behaviors that include people from different races, people's racist attitudes tend to soften. So behavior is much more likely to affect attitudes. Here's another study where students believed that they killed several bugs by dropping them in this, what appears to be a killing machine. You drop them in the funnel and it looks like the bug gets whirled to death. I give you a little asterisk. Nobody was actually, no bugs were really harmed. So when they thought that they had already killed some bugs, as under direction of the experiment and so on, they later killed more bugs during a self-paced killing period. So once you sort of softened their attitude about it by having them engage in the behavior, they were more likely to engage in that behavior. And so this is a bad example, right? Where you can soften people's attitudes towards negative behaviors. I mean, killing bugs isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, but it maybe is a model of, worse things that you could actually soften a person's attitude about and get them to engage in that they normally would not just walk off the street being willing to do. So engaging in behaviors can lead to attitudes. All right, now why do behaviors lead us to form our attitudes? Well, one theory that explains how behavior leads to attitudes is called cognitive dissonance theory. Okay, each of these words, theory, you know what the word theory refers to, right? It's an explanation of existing data. Okay, cognitive, that means that you're thinking, the things that are going on inside of your head, right? Dissonance means that there is a mismatch and it makes you uncomfortable. They use a word very similar to this to describe when the keys are on a piano are played wrong, or the trumpet is played a little bit off. It's like discordant, very similar. It's like it's not matching and it's kind of painful. And that's what dissonance refers to. The person who coined the term was Leon Festinger back in the 50s. And his original study went something like this. So they asked students to state what their attitude was about the tuition at the university that they were attending. And they sorted them into groups based on their stated attitude. So Fiona's attitude was that the tuition was too high. So people in Fiona's attitude condition then were assigned to give a speech in front of the student body, at least a subset of the student body, where they had to argue in favor of raising tuition because the school needs more money. So she believes that the tuition is already too high, and she's been assigned to give a speech in front of her peers arguing that tuition should be raised. And she does it. So she gives that speech in front of her peers. This causes cognitive dissonance for her. That causes her to become aware that her actual attitude and then her displayed behavior are inconsistent. Like, if I believe that the tuition is too high, why did I just give a speech in front of my peers arguing that tuition needs to be raised? Why would I do that? And, it may not be as overt as what I'm, acting. Why would I do that? But instead it's sort of mulling around in the back of her head, right? Probably subconsciously, she's kind of working on this problem of she just behaved in a very inconsistent way. So what can she do? Well, she can't change the fact that she just gave a speech in front of her peers, can she? Because a bunch of people just saw her. So she can soften her attitude because, people don't really know to what degree she felt like the tuition was too high. So she could say, my dissonance gets resolved by saying a softened version of my original attitude. Maybe the school has a point. She's not going to say something like, we need to double or triple tuition. She's not going to say something like that. She's not going to change her attitude from, one polar end to the other, like dramatically. She's instead going to soften her attitude so that it seems more in alignment with her behavior. right? Like, oh, actually giving that speech just sort of opened my mind to this little detail that I didn't know about. And so I guess I can see the school's point. So Festinger found that students who were put in this kind of situation displayed softened attitudes afterwards. So he really believed that probably what happened is that inside the person's head, they had that struggle of trying to, balance what they did and what they had said. And the easiest thing to change is what they had said. Because, there's always plausible deniability when you've shared an attitude, right? I have a really dear friend of mine, and I hope that she's not going to hear this and hear herself. I apologize, it's not a judgment. But when we were kids together, she had very strong attitudes about, sort of traditional values about, getting married and having children, and like very specific. And when her older sister moved in with her boyfriend without being married, my friend said that she didn't approve of that. She didn't think that was a good idea. I had not fully formed an attitude about that at that time. She had a very strong attitude about it. And so flash forward probably 4 years, and she moves in with her boyfriend. And I wasn't trying to be a problem. I wasn't trying to pick at her. I honestly said, I thought you didn't approve of, couples living together. And she said, well, I think it's okay if they're getting married. And then honestly, I couldn't convince her later that I wasn't being sarcastic. Honestly, I was not being sarcastic. I said, oh my gosh, are you guys engaged? Because she just said that it was okay if they're getting married. And so I thought that meant they were engaged. And she's like, no. And she was very unhappy with me that I was asking these questions. So I let it drop. But no, they hadn't gotten engaged, but she had softened her attitude. It's okay if you're getting married. And that way, it looks like I just misunderstood exactly what she thought about the situation, and actually that she's behaving in ways that are consistent with what she had always meant. I just misunderstood her. Now, the proof is kind of in the pudding, because later she did ultimately marry her boyfriend, and then her younger brother was getting married, and he and his fiance had their own apartments and everything. But a couple of weeks before the wedding, the lease on the girlfriend's apartment was running out, and so there was some talk about whether the girlfriend should just move in with my friend's brother, or if she should move back home prior to the wedding. And I said, well, I thought you thought it was okay to live together if people are getting married. And she's like, I never said that. She honestly denied it. So now that she was living in a way that was conforming to her original true attitude, she didn't have to maintain the softened attitude anymore. She could go back to what she truly believed. So I think the proof is in the pudding that she really did not approve of couples living together before marriage. She only softened it to account for her own behavior. It appears to me to be a clear case of, cognitive dissonance, where it made her feel uncomfortable, so she softened her attitude. Now, I wanted to share with you another way that cognitive dissonance has been studied. All right, so this looks like a fun task, doesn't it? The job in this experiment is to move the pegs from one hole to another in sequence. There's one empty hole, and you're supposed to just keep moving the pegs from one hole to the empty hole until you've moved all the way around the pegboard, and then keep doing it till the researcher comes back into the lab. So completely pointless, boring, and so on. Okay, so after completing the boring, everybody can agree boring task, half of the participants were offered $1 to tell the next participant who was waiting his turn. They were all male participants. So I will give you $1 if you will tell the next participant how fun this experiment was. They had this whole cover story, that people were, that the experiment was getting a bad reputation among students as being boring. So help us out, man. We're getting a lot of people who aren't coming and stuff. So can you tell the next person that this is a really fun study? I'll give you $1. The other half of the participants were offered $20 to tell the next person how fun and exciting the study was. Okay, so we have two groups. One that got $1 to basically lie to the next participant. The other half were given $20 to basically lie to the next person who was waiting. After it was over, the participants who had already completed the study and had gotten either their $1 or their $20 for telling the next person how fun it was, rated the funness of the study. So they each completed a little rating scale. All right, so which group do you think rated the experiment as more fun? The group that got $20 to lie to the waiting participant, or the group that got $1 to lie to the waiting participant? I guess I can just reveal it to you because we're not in class and we can't guess, can we? And you guys can't give your reasoning and stuff, but so I'll just tell you how it works out. Okay, there it is. The people who received $1 rated the task as more fun than the people who received $20. Why would that be? Why would receiving $1 to lie make you lie even to yourself now, whereas receiving $20 causes you to be more than happy to lie to the next participant, but you're not really lying to yourself? Whoops, there we are. Well, there's this aspect of cognitive dissonance theory called insufficient justification. So if I was given $1 to lie to a peer, that's $1 is really not sufficient justification to warrant me lying to the next person. So a typical response that the people who were given $1 gave for why they were willing to lie and stuff. I said the Dole experiment was interesting. I had insufficient justification for doing so. Maybe it was sort of interesting. Like that's probably the thought process that they went through. The people who got $20 though, well, that was sufficient justification for telling a lie. I said the Dole experiment was interesting, but I had sufficient reason for doing so. I did it for $20. If I did it for $1, I have to go, well, that doesn't seem like enough to make it worthwhile to lie to a peer. So maybe this thing wasn't as boring as I thought it was, right? You know, the true amount of funness it was a -0.5. You can tell from the control group who didn't have to tell any lies and didn't get any rewards. They just rated the funness of the experiment. So when you have a justification for why you acted the way you did, well, I did it for money. I did it because, everybody was, cheering for me to do it. I did it because everybody else did it. That's actually, that kind of conformity explanation is a valid one. That's a lot of justification if everybody else is doing it. Then you don't experience a lot of dissonance for why you did it. But when there isn't really compelling sort of motive, I was paid too little, I was by myself, nobody was caring that I was doing it. There was no cheering or booing. It was just, nobody even knew I was doing it. Now you have to really do some self-reflection and say, why did I act like that? Right? So you can, with that insufficient justification, you experience more cognitive dissonance, and that causes you to really think, maybe my attitude isn't as strong as I thought it was. All right, here's another aspect of cognitive dissonance theory. So I found this cartoon. I think it's Dilbert. Why should I hire you as my consultant? The dog says, I'll use my special process of cognitive dissonance to improve employee morale. The boss says, how does it work? The dog says, when people are in an absurd situation, their minds rationalize it by inventing a comfortable illusion. Okay, go do it. So the dog walks up to an employee and says, isn't it strange that you have this dead-end job when you're twice as smart as your boss? The hours are long, the pay is mediocre, nobody respects your contributions, and yet you freely choose to work here. And the employee says, it is absurd. No, wait, there must be a reason. I must work here because I love the work. And then as the dog walks away saying next, the employee singing to himself, I love this job. So this is an example of cognitive dissonance where you have a person who, it's brought to his attention, is working harder than the reimbursement and the accolades and other kinds of things really would warrant. Insufficient justification again, right? Where, why are you doing this? It doesn't seem like you're being rewarded enough. So he has this moment of discomfort as he's experiencing the dissonance of his behavior relative to, what he should be valuing. And then he ultimately puts it together. You know what? I'm not here for the money. I'm not here for the respect. I'm here because I love this job. I love this job, right? So cognitive dissonance theory can help us to explain why people will exert effort even when it doesn't make sense. That component is called justification of effort. So if you think about people who engage in clubs or other kinds of groups that involve, a long history of hazing, there are groups where it's part of their mystique that there's hazing involved, right? And you think, why would you want to join a group that's going to treat you like that, make you crawl around or make you overdrink or, other degrading or harmful things? Why would you do that? One of the reasons why people are willing to go through those kinds of hoops and things to get into certain groups is because the fact that that other people are willing to jump through those hoops makes the end more valuable to them. It justifies the effort in their minds. It must be a really exclusive and meaningful club if people are willing to do those things to get into it, right? It's really exclusive because not only do they pick you to even get to try and be in the group, but then only those of us who are really committed, as evidenced by our crawling and drinking and doing our other things, that's how it's a really, selective group. Only special people can be in it. And then, of course, once you're in it, it's contingent on you to pass on the hazing because, won't the group lose some of its cachet if we stop hazing people? So that's how hazing gets preserved, right? Is through that kind of mindset where it's like, well, it's part of how you get in this club. So we have to do it. For outsiders, we always look in and we say, why would you do that? There have been, I don't know how many news stories over the course of my adult life where it's like, revealing yet another branch of the service that involves some kind of hazing, or yet another person who died at the hands of, the Greek system hazing processes, things like that. And, on the outside, people always look askance and they're like, why would people do this? I just don't understand. And the reason why is that the person who's being hazed is experiencing cognitive dissonance. They're like, why would I do this? I have more dignity than this. And then they reconcile it by saying it must be worth the effort. Right? It must be that I really want to be in this group or that this group is really valuable. And so that's why they're willing to do it. All right, let's go ahead and take a little break and we'll come back with our next evidence that behavior leads to attitudes, which is the foot in the door phenomenon.